That's how it's always been. Well, how it's always been is wrong. And if it's wrong, we stop it. That should be the goal here, is to progress past the point of that's just how it's always been.
Yeah. And also, like, the sheriff, knows that the deputy is harassing and intimidating the Skagarans. But all he does is like, you need to stop that. Like, so.
Yeah, no real consequence.
Yeah, no real consequence. So, like you're saying, if you're not willing to make a stand, you're part of the problem because he's continuing, oppression to continue.
Yes. And by the end of the episode, it's clear that had we come back to this planet, the story would have been that he did enact change. And they gave him these traits because they wanted him to be primed for change. I mean, that's clearly what they were going for, that he was far enough along that he wasn't any better than anyone else, but he was in a better position mentally to start being better than everybody else, if that makes sense. And I feel like that's actually a really good analogy for our world today, that there's a lot of people who 5 years ago wouldn't have been ready to be a part of the movement that are now mentally prepared to go in and be part of this movement and not get in its way and not get in their own way by, like you said, defending themselves all the time. Stop defending yourself. Everyone knows you weren't around for slavery. We get that. That's not the point.
Absolutely not the point.
Yes, but it's one of the biggest things you hear said.
Yeah.
I wasn't here then. We understand that. We get it. We all get it. Everyone understands that. That doesn't mean policies from them have not trickled their way through history to now that are affecting things. And we should be bettering ourselves, not trying to say, well, it's a little bit better than it was, so we're okay. All right, so in closing, we need to stand with people that don't want murder to happen, period. End of story, right? And more importantly, we need to go to people who are affected by things, whatever it may be, in general. For this discussion, though, we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. We need to go to the people who are most affected by this and hear what they have to say. We need to stop defending ourselves. We need to stop telling them what we think will fix the problem. We need to sit and listen. As a society, we need to sit and listen to the people most affected by things and work on a solution that they want. Not that appeases us and makes us happy. What is the solution that makes them happy? What is the solution that they see as being the right solution to the problem?
That is exactly right. And I'm going to bring up a incident that happened at my beloved University of Utah. I'm big into college football, and Utah Utes is my team. Well, the defensive coordinator 7 years ago, again, this happened in 2013, sent a text using the N-word. And he is now on suspension, obviously. And one of the points that was brought up, which to your point, Pat, the consequences of that should not be unilaterally come down from the president of the university. What happens to that defensive coordinator needs to come from the players. They are the ones who are affected. They are the ones, do they consider that racism? Are they offended? They need to come up with and be part of the consequences for that coordinator, right? Because they are the ones who is being affected. I mean, yeah, I get the university is ultimately, to blame, but they need to go to the football players and say, what are we going to do? Listen to them.
Yeah, I would agree. And the community at large, because it's not just the players. I mean, yes, they're affected because it was sent out to them and they have direct contact with them. But what about the community around Utah Utes? What about the minority community around them? They're going to be heavily affected by these statements as well.
Yeah. It's definitely, comes down to, as we've said throughout this entire episode, listening, not get defensive, and changing and accepting our white privilege and accepting that there is racism, accepting and listening and not getting defensive. Like there is so much that we can do. And I know sometimes it's difficult to see that if we do change, that it's going to affect change in the larger systems. Because when you look at our laws, our education, right, all of these policies that are way above what we really can change, but it takes all of us changing our hearts and changing us and making stands, and whether that's going to a protest or not shopping at a store that doesn't support, that has these policies that continue inequality. We can do something, and we need to do something. That is my plea.
Yeah, absolutely. And so while we were recording this, I was actually talking to someone who's been in the trenches since 2013. And their answer to me was, when I asked, what can we do? The answer was to listen. Just listen. Don't interrupt. Don't talk over us. With their, meaning, us, with our ideas and suggestions. Put their ego and pride and fragility aside. And that's the most important thing. Put your ego aside for a second and just listen. And then leave your ego there, by the way. Don't pick it back up. Don't later on, don't think because you've been involved with a movement for a month or 2 months or 6 months or a year or 5 years that you can start then dictating back what you believe is a better idea. You can't, because you don't live it.
Listen to their ideas, listen to their struggles, listen to their stories, and do not use the word but.
Correct. Please join us on our Facebook page at UFP Earth, where we would love to hear what you think of this episode. So, Amy, where can people find you when you're not discussing Star Trek in very controversial terms?
Well, when I'm not doing that, you can find me over on Trek FM hosting Earl Grey. And you can find me in our Facebook group, UFP Earth. And you can find me on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson. And Pat, where can people find you when you are not protesting for Black Lives Matter?
Well, for the next couple hours, they can't. After that, you can find me on Twitch or Twitter at MagicDrop5. That's no spaces, and the 5 is a digit, not spelled out. You can also find me on this network with Mickey's Marvels with my good friend Tribs, where we discuss all things Disney. And you can find me on the UFP Facebook page, where I will be glad to have a conversation with you about any of the topics we cover on this show or Mickey's Marvels. Yeah, and that's about the only place you can find me. And going back to an email we got in the very beginning, I know that this particular episode doesn't really seem to thrive with hope and optimism, but I think that exactly the opposite. I think in the hard times, in the pressure we are feeling now, I can't think of the right word to use, but I think the outcome is very optimistic, and I think that we are we are starting to listen. I think we're heading in the right direction because we are, as a society, starting to listen to those that are most affected, and that's a good thing.
It is. It is. Yes.
So please go to iTunes and leave us a star rating and written review. That will help others find our show, and let us know what you'd like for us to discuss. We are open to your ideas. And you try to step on my line again.
I almost
always
did.
Step on that line.
I know. So now my part of the closing. At this time, we would like to thank our executive producers who make this all possible. They are Brandon-Shea Mutella, Ken Tripp, Zach Moore, and Tony Robinson.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you'll join us as we search out all good things.
This has been a production of MTMR Media Works.